Before we hone the block, we have to know what we're honing the block to. Your piston box will come with a sheet telling you all about the pistons and what they are and how much clearance and for each application. If you're putting the engine together for your grandmother, that would be less clearance than if you're going to be spraying a 500 shot on the weekends. So the first thing you want to do is measure. The way they want you to measure these, you have to read the instructions. Some people want you to measure 500 up, some people want you to measure from down here. In the instructions it'll tell you where to measure. This particular piston was measure 1.25 down from the ring groove, which is 500 up basically, which is a normal place. But some places want it at the bottom of the skirt. And do this a few times so you make sure that you're getting the right number. And that should correspond with what they have listed. Now, even though we call these 426 Hemis, nowadays all these blocks go 4-500 pretty much. So you're going to be using a 4-500 bore. And since there's no downside to 4-500 unless you're in a high boost situation, and that's different. The stock stroke cranks are the same price as the stroker cranks, so you're probably going to be building a 572 or a 528 depending on which stroke you go with. And you might be wondering, why does a 426 Hemi make 425 horse, but if you order a single 4-barrel pump gas flat tappet engine from Ray Barton, it makes 800 horse? Well, part of the reason is wonderful parts like these. This is top of the line stuff with so much improvements over the stock piston, it's ridiculous. I don't know. There could be 100 horsepower in this thing. I don't know. Notice the 043 rings, 3mm oil ring, gas ports, 990 pin by 293 long instead of, look at this dog. Can you believe we used to run this stuff? Look at this monster. It weighs over 1,000 grams. This is under 700 grams. Because it's a stock stroke, you have to have this big dome when you don't have to have much dome when you have a massive stroke, because you've got that much more compression. It's embarrassing. The only thing bad about new pistons is you have to use spiral locks just for their stupid reasons. They think we're all running pro stock when we're not. These things never came out. I don't see any reason to change something that's never failed. But lightened under here. These are just great parts. And if somebody offers you some of these for $5, just tell him, no thank you, I quit smoking and I don't need 8 ashtrays. Use parts like this. It's really nice stuff. And this is where all the power is at, is the good parts, the good flowing heads. It's a higher lift camshaft and a longer duration. But these lightweight rotating assemblies like we have today, the rods are the same way. They're just a lot better than what we had before. So, and you probably don't need to measure this because you're going to take this to the machine shop and tell the man to hone the thing anyway. But we at least ought to look at it and know what you have, just for your own information. Okay, now I've made the first pass through the block with the hone, just enough to take out the grooves left by the boring machine. And now we're down to a smooth bore, and we have 5/1000ths to go before we're done with the honing. There's a couple things I wanted to mention. This block came without dowel pins, which that's fine because they're liable to send you the wrong ones. They look like 1/4-inch dowel pins. They are not 1/4-inch dowel pins. They're about 246 or 247. If you try to put 1/4-inch dowel pins in here, you could not only mess up your block, of course, but the heads may not go on. I've seen several heads that will not go down on 1/4-inch because you made it wider and narrower. These are a Pioneer PG 695-25 means there's 25 in the box. You don't need that many, but at least you know what you're looking for. PG 695. Another thing you'll have to keep on your mind is on a street Hemi block or a KB block, these bosses are about that long. It's going to take a different inner head stud than the Callies, and I believe the World is the same as this. So just keep that in mind when you're buying head studs. Okay, so now we're doing the cylinder honing. It's not like the old days where you just use a certain grit hone to give you the proper finish, and your only job is really to keep it from tapering. And when the 426 Hemi came out, they specified a 30 to 40 micro finish, or what did they call it? Micro inches? It's micro inches, I think they called it. Now we call that RA, which is the roughness average, RA. And then in the 70s or so, the rings changed and they wanted a smoother finish. They wanted 20 to 30. Well, that's not a problem. You use finer stones. Then people got to wanting 10 to 20. Well, when you do that, you're losing your scratches, what we call the depth of the valley. In other words, the scratch, which is RVK. RVK is how deep your scratch is to hold the oil to lubricate everything. So eventually, through all this, and back then, remember, you had to break in your car. It wouldn't make, they would tell you it's going to be 500 miles before it, runs its best. And that's because you're wiping off the peaks. When you hone something, you have the scratch is the valley, and the material that came out of that scratch that's now up on the sides. Imagine drawing your finger in the sand. The bottom of where your finger was is the valley, and where that material came out on top here, that's the peak. So the theory of breaking the car in is the piston wears off those peaks, and you eventually get down to what they call core roughness, core average, which is RK, which people like Dick Maskin say that's the only number that matters, especially to a guy like him who's putting an engine on the dyno. So what we have today is everybody wants a plateau hone. Plateau hone means you start with rough stones to give you the valleys to hold the oil, and you'll either one or two steps after that you will use a stone to knock off the peaks to make a plateau. There's your scratches in the cylinder wall, like that, and then you take a stone and cut off the peaks, and then you want to get it down to RK. RK is your core, which is where it would be if you drove it 500 miles with the old finish to where it will now make max power. So if you're a pro stock engine builder and you finished it the old way, and you had to wait 500 miles on the dyno before you could get a reading, that really wouldn't work. So that's where we're at today. Everybody wants a plateau hone. Before we get down to finished size, we have to practice what we're going to do to get our final finish when we get down to size. We can't wait until we get to final size and then try to do our plateau finish and find out it doesn't work and we don't have any meat left to work with. So we'll get the profilometer to take a reading of this and see what our numbers look like. They may not be good. These callage blocks just came out. I mean, it looks like cast iron to you and me, but we don't know what the numbers are going to say. I think it strokes about 350 thousandths of an inch while it takes this reading. The main numbers you want is, of course, RA is going to be, you know, it's going to be fine anyway. That's all that people used to know is RA, but that's really, your 12-year-old granddaughter could hit RA. We want some RVK for depth in the valleys. We want the RK in the low 30s if we can get it. RK 27, I'm happy. Dick Maskin says high 20s, low 30s. RPK, that's pretty much perfect. RVK 17, that's totally unusable. We're going to have to go to different stones because that's miserable. RA, that's too smooth. You know, it looked smooth, but you have to do this. You know. Okay, so we know now, which is why we did this, that what we did's not going to work, and we're going to have to keep doing it until it does. Looks like go with coarser grit stone and get some RVK, then come back in with 400 grit and put a plateau on it and see how it works. It ain't easy, in case you thought it was easy. Okay, so I went with a rougher finishing stone and the same 6 strokes with the fine stones for the plateau, and hopefully we'll come up with some better numbers. The RVK is tough to get. I know that Total Seal tells you their rings don't take anything special. Yeah, well, just they ought to trying to get 45 or 50 RVK, then tell me it's not a problem. That looks kind of all over. It's rougher, we'll say that. RK49, way too high, but that's easy to take. You just take some more swipes at the end. I've never used a RPK 13. That's livable. I've never used stones this rough for finish, so RVK 70. So, I mean, this is a new experience. Okay, so all these numbers are too high, and that's easy to fix. All you have to do is start over and make more passes on the plateau. You're trying to take the peaks down further. In other words, I've never used stones this rough for a final, so this wasn't going to be a walk in the park. All right, I'll do it all over again. RK 17, too low. RPK 8, too low. RVK 14, too low. RA 6, you could live with that, but that's low. So, Looks like 12 strokes is too much. I guess we'll have to go back to 9 and see what happens there. That looks like a smooth graph, you know what I mean? And sure enough, it is smooth. All right, we'll do this over again. Okay, after all of that, I think we're finally where we need to be. The block was just... I always have problems getting the valleys deep enough, but RVK is as good as I'm going to get at that. RA of 12, which is perfect in everybody's mind. RK 33, everybody's happy with that. RPK 13, that's perfect in everybody's book. So, life is good. It sometimes just takes a while to get where you're going. Now I can put the torque plate on it and hone the size and finish the cylinders now that we know what we need to do when we get to the end. So they all tell you have to use a torque plate because of the distortion caused by tightening the head bolts. When you are supposed to be simulating exactly how you will be putting it together. So this is a Fel-Pro 1104 head gasket, which we'll be using because it's a 10.5 compression street motor, and that'll be fine for the job. Then we have the Chrysler instructions on torquing down the head. Increments of 25, 50, and 75, and we have the torque sequence. We have the proper tool to do the inside head bolts, which I will show you that when we get down to the final assembly. Before we put this on, I think we should get an initial measurement to know where we're at right now. Say an inch from the top, we've got 4.9. And at the bottom, say an inch from the bottom, we've got 4.8 or a hair more than 4.8. Okay, I'll get this put on and torque down. Okay, I've got the torque plate on with the hardware that we're going to use, the gasket we're going to use. And by the way, you're going to need a little adapter like this to get the inside head bolts. This is a Snap-on FRD H181. This is for the stock nuts. They're 9/16. If you get the ARP studs, that's sometimes it's a 12 point, and that'll be a different number. And then we'll have to discuss on how to calculate the torque with this as opposed to using the torque wrench only. And while we're talking about ARP, if you go to ARP studs, like we talked on the main caps, they're fine thread instead of coarse thread, where you're tightening here. And of course it's a stud instead of a bolt, so you're not twisting the whole bolt, you're just turning a nut. And you're using ARP lube instead of motor oil, and you're torquing them, they're harder, so you're having to torque them higher to get them to stretch. So you torque them to 80 instead of 75. Well, what does all that add up to? Well, a whole lot more clamping force. And the pull that is giving you the clamping force, the pull is what's distorting the bores. If you had no pull on these, there would be no distortion. So everything's installed here and we're ready to go. And I can't believe how bad the numbers were when I checked it. Down on the bottom, same exact thing. Got 4.9. It was between 4.8 and 4.9. And at the top, we've got, oh wow, 5.5, depending here, 5.5. 6/10, you know, half a thou. That's terrible. I don't know why it's that bad. I've done street Hemis before that were only 2/10. But That's with head bolts. That would be much worse if you put ARP studs in it. And most people will probably use ARP studs because you can't even buy these head bolts anymore. I think I've only got one set left. So that's not good. That means you're going to have to torque plate home like everybody says. I hate it, but that's just the way it is. So now I will go ahead and finish honing it.